Welcome back, folks. Today we are talking about Egypt. Yes, the land of the Sphinx and the pyramids. I want to just kind of give you a quick overview, some basics about the country of Egypt, um, so that hopefully we got just a little deeper knowledge about it. Physically, when you think of Egypt, there's two main physical features that you think of. You think of desert and you think of river. The river is going to be, of course, the longest river in the world, the Nile River. Um, it is going to be the place where you're going to see an overwhelming majority of people actually living in Egypt. We talked earlier in the year about population density and how population density isn't always going to be a very reliable number because there can be some places where the numbers just don't tell the real story. This is like the poster child for exactly that because in Egypt, you see about 99% of the population living in that Nile River Valley. So about 99% is going to live on only about 3.5% of the land. The other, what is that, 76 or 96.5% of the land is going to be desert, where you're going to see around 1% of the population living. So the population density of Egypt is not even going to be close to accurate. So if a majority of people are living in that Nile River Valley, naturally there's going to be some hazards that are going to come along with that. Flooding. When we think of flooding, that's going to be the big, environmental problem that they're really going to see. So when we think of flooding, we naturally are going to think negative. We're naturally going to think loss of life, loss of property, losing your home, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, there's actually going to be some positives and some negatives when it comes to flooding. If you're living in the Nile River Valley and you're a farmer, for example, um, a positive would be that when it floods, it deposits nutrients into the soil. That's fertilizer you don't have to buy. A natural negative is that, well, you can't control that. So you can't control when it happens and you can't control how far it goes. It can be destructive because of that. A positive is that it's going to naturally hold down the insect population, meaning less insects that are going to eat up your crops, for example. So yes, there are some absolute negatives to flooding, but if you're living here historically, there are some positives as well. So at one point, they got the idea of, hey, the big thing about this that makes it a negative is that we can't control it. Well, what if we built a dam that could control some of that flooding? Okay, they did that. They called it the Aswan High Dam. And anytime you introduce something into the physical landscape, there's going to be some unintended consequences, some things that you didn't mean to happen, but come about because of it anyways. Some things that maybe you didn't think of. Okay, there are going to be some positives. So you bring control to the river. The positives that are going to come with that, obviously, it's going to be safer. You can add a hydroelectric plant. Now more people have access to reliable electricity. A place like Cairo, for example. A lot of people in Cairo used to have electricity. A lot of the people that had it was kind of spotty. It would come and it would go. Hydroelectric plant means lots more people have access to electricity. That's obviously going to be a positive. Behind the dam is going to become a reservoir. That's going to make it so that fish are going to pool up in one place, meaning a fishing industry that for the most part didn't exist before. More food for people, more jobs for people. That's obviously going to be a positive. And then clean water. In addition to the hydroelectric plant, we can put in a water treatment plant so that when an elephant, let's say, decides it's going to take a bath in the river, that can all get filtered out before it gets to the people using it in Egypt. So there's obviously going to be some positives to building that dam. But like we said, some unintended consequences. What are some of the negatives? The insect population has risen dramatically. Previously, when it would flood every year, it would naturally wash away the eggs of those insects, controlling the insect population. Now, you no longer have that, which means you've got to spray pesticides. The second one, salt and fertilizers. The the closer you get to the ocean, the more salt content you're going to see in the land. So when it would flood, it would wash away a lot of that salt and make for fertile farmland. Now that that's no longer happening, you're seeing a higher salt content in the land. Higher salt content means the land won't produce, so you're seeing more and more chemical fertilizers being used. The bottom line to those two things is that an increase in population is being seen in this area, or an increase in pollution is being seen in this area as a result of all of that. Housing, the number of houses that were available were going to change as well, because when you build that dam, that's going to mean that some people are going to be displaced. Their homes are going to have to um, be basically taken over so that uh, that dam can be created, that reservoir can be created. How do you account for more people needing houses? So housing has been an issue too. So the Nile River is the lifeblood of Egypt, no doubt about that. There's some positives and negatives to living there. We said the other big physical feature you're going to find here is going to be deserts. You'll look at this picture here. Everything in green, that is the Nile River. The green represents the availability of water. Everything else outside of that is going to be desert landscape. And if you know your political map, it's going to help you with your physical here, because to the west of the Nile River, that country is going to be Libya. The west of the Nile River is going to be the Libyan desert. To the east of Egypt, that is going to be Saudi Arabia. To the east of the Nile River, that is going to be the Arabian Desert. And then you have the Sinai Peninsula, which is over here, interrupted in the middle by that Suez Canal, that strip of green. Culturally, all right. So the first big thing about culture in Egypt is that the difference between villages and cities. The cities you're going to find there, places like Cairo, for example, really aren't going to be that different from what you're going to find here. They're going to have a lot of the same types of things. There's going to be Wi-Fi. There's going to be cars. There's going to be all that stuff that you would expect to see in any kind of modern city. You're going to find those things. The big difference is going to come in the villages. People living in small villages are essentially living very much like the way they did hundreds of years ago. You really haven't seen much change in these smaller villages. So what we're getting at here is, here in the United States, we have small towns. You could drop any one of you in the middle of small town Indiana, Milan, for example. We could drop you in Milan and you'll get along just fine. If you did the same thing in Egypt, you took somebody from a city or a village and you drop them into a city, it's going to be a dramatic shift in lifestyle. Second big thing about them culturally is this is the place of a lot of your ancient civilization. You think of the ancient Egyptians. This is where you're going to find that, and because of that ancient civilization, you see a lot of firsts, a lot of things that we absolutely um, absolutely going to associate with this place. For example, the first formal government was going to be ancient Egypt. The first formal religion, the first written language, going to be ancient Egypt. When we think of pyramids, they were going to be used as tombs for the higher ups. Not everybody had a pyramid, but they were going to be used as tombs. Very much like you might see a mausoleum or something like that here in the United States today. So a lot of things that we kind of take for granted, the idea that we have a formal religion that, hey, everybody's going to do things the same way, we're all going to worship the same God, that was originally an Egyptian thing. They are Muslim today. They are a country that's gotten a lot of European interests, specifically British interests. And a lot of that has to do with the Suez Canal and the money to be made off of the Suez Canal. Because you're taking, say, for example, oil from the Persian Gulf around through the Red Sea, and then you can get it into the Mediterranean Sea very, very quickly rather than going all the way around Africa. And as we've always said, time is money. And lastly, for Egypt, some politics. Israel and the wars, we've talked about that before. They were a part of the Arab League, and they were one of the first countries to drop out of the Arab League and officially recognize Israel as a country. That has soured a lot of relationships from them in the Middle East. Some numbers. Urbanization. How quickly are the cities growing? They're growing at a rate of about 4%. If you remember from early in the year, we said anything over 1% is considered high. They're at 4%. So they're urbanizing at an extremely fast rate. Their population growing is growing at 1.7%. So again, not crazy high, but it is high. And the problem that they have there is that it's a place that doesn't produce a whole lot of their own food. If you can't produce your own food, and you're going to see that a lot in Africa, if you can't produce your own food, you have to import it from somewhere. If I have to import it, that means it's going to cost more. Okay. So the fact that they're rising at such a high rate means that they're spending an awful lot of money just to feed themselves. So, what is it that they're growing on their farms along the Nile River? Big product is going to be cotton. If you look for like the best, softest, most luxurious cotton in the world, everybody's always going to tell you, hey, Egyptian cotton is among the absolute best. It has to do with the conditions there. It has to do with the water. It has to do with a lot of different things. But ultimately, cotton is going to be a big product that they're going to grow rather than food. Oil and petroleum is going to be something that they're going to have. They are going to be, an oil producing nation, have a lot of raw materials. What they don't have is a lot of the factories to really turn that into anything. Now, here's something that you could see as a short answer kind of thing that I might ask you about. Um, when it comes to Egypt, they have had some issues, some problems with regards to developing industry. They want to develop industry to be able to take these raw materials, turn it into something. The problem that they're having is really threefold. Number one, workers. It's not that they don't have enough workers, they have plenty of workers. What they don't have is a lot of workers who have the skills needed to create the industries that they are looking for. Second, education. Not that they're uneducated, they have a fine education system there. The problem they have is getting people to have the education that is going to be needed to create those industries. And what has been happening is in the past, Egypt has actually funded students to go to other countries in the world and become educated in this. The idea is this: they'll pay for you to go get it, and then you go back to Egypt and you bring that knowledge back. The problem they're running into is that somebody might come to, say, the United States, get their education here, and then all of a sudden they have a choice. Do I go back to Egypt where the industry doesn't exist, or do I stay in the United States where I probably make more working in an industry that already exists? I don't have to create it from scratch. A lot of people are choosing to stay in the United States, which means Egypt pays for them to get their education, and then ultimately they don't benefit from it. The final problem, in addition to workers with the skills, education being available for the industries that they need, is just the capital. The idea that, hey, we need money in order to make these things work. Okay, so you put those three things together, and that's why you don't see a lot of the industries that are going to work with the raw materials that they have. Last thing we want to talk about there is Arab Spring. You learned a little bit about that in class yesterday. Egypt was going to be a part of Arab Spring. Their president Hosni Mubarak had been president, quotes around president, for about 40 years. He had been in power for a really, really, really long time. There were, just like in other places, protests going on. Mubarak decided, hey, I know what I'll do. I'll break this up. I will shut off the internet. I will not allow internet to be used in in Egypt. So he shut down the internet. The problem with that was a lot of people were keeping tabs on what was going on by social media, by the internet, and when the internet and social media were no longer there, at that point, all of those people who were sitting in their homes following it had to actually go down to the street and get involved. So that made the protests even bigger. Mubarak wound up hiring gangs to try and break it up, was caught doing it, and ultimately removed from the presidency. They put somebody new in, and very, very quickly they got rid of this guy Morsi, because he was convicted of incitement of murder and violence. Not exactly the type of person you want as your president. So, all in all, they've gone through Arab Spring. They're still trying to work through it, but they're one of those countries that has redone their government multiple times. And that is everything we need to know about Egypt right now.